Hi, welcome back to this episode of Writing Tandem, and a really interesting guest on today because on the podcast, we're going to do a lot of talking about podcasts. And who we have today, I met actually through a networking event, so we'll talk more about that. But it's Dylan Yeomans, and he is a really great communicator who runs his own podcast, but it's a networking podcast. And that's what we dive in today is what is a networking podcast? And if I wanted to start a networking podcast, what would that look like? As well as just some really great tips and thoughts and ideas about networking in general. And so he's going to be talking about, he hosts the UIA Trusted Partners podcast, and he connects Omaha's amazing businesses through a podcast format. And he does networking through a podcast format, which I think you're going to find just super interesting. So I'm excited to have you here for that. We also get to dive into just some of the dynamics as well. We deviated a bit. We talked about what is it like when you have to give a quote to somebody? Because of course, Dylan comes from the insurance world. He's also an insurance agent. And that's a question that a lot of us have. Like, how do I talk about the price tag to what it is that I offer? And so we have a good candid conversation with some really pointed tips about that for you as well. Dylan, of course, can't help himself. And I had to ask a couple questions about insurance for businesses. And so there's a little bit of that sprinkled in. And then we learned all kinds of great things about Dylan and his amazing Hawaiian t-shirt collection or shirt collection. So this is a fun episode. There's a lot to cover here. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And it's a really interesting perspective on how you can be doing your networking in a unique and different way. So let's go ahead and dive in here. Well, I'm thrilled to have you today. This is Dylan Yeomans, and he's a passionate communicator, rich background, I would say, for sure, in radio broadcasting. You have a thriving career in the insurance industry, and you have a podcast, which we're going to be talking about. So I'm excited to have you here and just talking about navigating all of these aspects of life as you've gone some career changes, podcasting, expert networking. So welcome.
I appreciate the introduction. That's quite the introduction. So thank you for having me on, as the roles are now reversed. I'm never on this side of the microphone. Like, I'm never the interviewee. So I'm actually a little nervous and I'm a little excited for this.
Well, that's perfect. Well, it's hopefully your nerves are put at rest here quickly. It's very conversational. We're going to have a good chat. But yes, I was just in your offices last week to record the UIA Trusted Partners podcast. So I was a guest on yours. You're coming on to be a guest here. So we're going to do a little bit of a swap. Maybe we'll see if we can publish around the same time. So show notes, of course, we'll have links to these as well. So yeah, it is fun to reverse it for sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a cool perspective to kind of get back, not like a humbled, but, just a nice flip the script.
Yes, it is a flip the script for sure. So we met, interestingly, at the Omaha Empowerment Breakfast.
Yeah.
And we chatted there and I think just like connected. And then you reached out, connected further, and we talked about your podcast. We kind of just talked about podcasting in general, sort of swapping some podcasting thoughts and ideas. I think you've done a really great job of connecting into just Omaha has a pretty vibrant business community, but just being able to connect into that business community. And so I thought that would be really fun to talk about, as well as insurance side of things and your background. And I think this will be a fun conversation. Lots of places we can go with it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I know my background's a little interesting on paper. That's sure.
That's right.
But,
it is.
Yeah, no, the networking and how we had kind of met through you were a speaker at the Omaha Power Breakfast. And when you were talking about Tandem Works and then you had led into writing Tandem, I was like, okay, well, we have to do something.
Yes. 2 podcasters in the room. Now, what we did learn when I was on yours is that we can get talking. So there's that, but lots of good things to talk about. One of the things that I want to talk about first with you, because I think from observing you, I think you do an excellent job with this, is just networking. And how have you felt about networking throughout your career? I know you've had a radio broadcast career, so like communicating has been a piece, but I don't know, like explain to when you're on radio, you can kind of be an introvert, right? Like you're not in front of people, you're behind a mic. So when you think about networking throughout your entire career and where you're at even now, building book of business, et cetera, like what comes to mind to you when you think about that word? Has it always been easy?
That's a really interesting question, because the answer is no. It actually wasn't very easy to begin with for myself, as weird as that might sound.
Because I think
because
you're excellent at it.
well, I appreciate that because I think the oddity that I come from radio, but
Hmm.
you're very right. Like, I actually know a lot of radio guys still that are very introverted. They don't do a lot of on location stuff usually, but they're always at their job and doing their stuff and doing their regular shifts.
Sure.
It's easy for them because they just see the microphone, they see the screen, they can block out the rest, right? Well,
Yeah.
for others in that industry, they understand that as soon as I push that button to talk in the microphone, there's 10,000 plus ears listening.
Hmm.
So some people thrive off of that part of things too. And I was kind of in the middle of that to where I liked being out in the public. I liked going out on location. But to translate that into networking was kind of the hard part
Hmm.
because I had to learn to not be on. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? Like that was a big thing to kind of just turn that off, and I don't have to be on, but I can be communicative and I can actually talk with people and just be genuine. I think
Yes.
that was kind of an interesting transition for myself. As far as networking in general goes, there's so much out there. I'm part of a few different organizations, a few different groups in there, the Omaha Power Breakfast, the MBA, Center Sphere, just to name a couple of them. People in my
Hmm.
office are well connected throughout the rest, like the Westo Chamber, SARPE, etc. I think what's really beneficial about all of that in general, right? If I could take all of that, squeeze it down to a quick shot of information, it would be your relationships matter. The people that you're putting time and effort into, you need to understand that while that might be really good for your industry or really good for your business, if you make that lead and that connection, sometimes that doesn't translate back for that other person.
Mm.
So that's something to keep in mind, to not get offended or not get upset by that, but just to understand that that's kind of just how the symbiotic relationships go with industries.
Yeah, that's so true. So I'm really curious. How did you learn to do that? I hear what you're saying about always being on, and I could imagine coming from a radio, like you were literally on, like we are on air and you
Mm-hmm.
are in, not in character, but you're in your zone, if you will.
Yeah.
How did you learn to turn that off and not be like broadcasting, in person?
Yeah, it still slips out from time to time. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong. I'll I'll inflect and I'll get the radio guy voice sometimes, but a lot of it for me was actually what you had mentioned was a character. So I kind of had to, I don't want to say the Jim Carrey method, but I almost had to put it as a character. Like when I'm doing the radio stuff and I'm doing that kind of thing, it was almost like a personality. It was just a choice. It was a character. It was just a thing that I could just tap into, right?
Hmm.
But then I realized I didn't have to just go full into that character, so to speak, to still utilize that ability. I just had to be confident with who I was and just be comfortable with having that conversation without being broadcast, being energetic and being on all the time and being this
Hmm.
really exciting guy when that's sometimes that's just not the case.
Yeah, that I think is huge. I think about it's a question that we often get of how can I network better? How can I become a household name? Who do I
Yeah,
need to connect with? Who can you connect me with? All good questions. Nothing
great
wrong with the
questions.
questions. But I hear you in that I think it's easy for a business owner or a business leader to feel like they have to don this character and be
Yeah,
on all the time, that they just can't be themselves. And certainly there's a level of professionalism and
sure.
things, but you can take it too far, don't you think?
I do. I think that there's a fine line between being overly professional to where it's almost like it's a character
Mm-hmm.
and being a little too authentic or a little too genuine because you
Mm,
have to be approachable and you have to be professional at the same time. You
yeah.
can't be cold, rigid, and expect business to walk up to you. But you also can't be this wild animated character out of a cartoon and expect somebody to take you seriously
Yeah,
either.
if that's not you, for sure.
So there is one of those, it's a very fine, delicate balance that business owners, I think, when you start into networking, I think a lot of times they start to feel that out as they kind of get a little more into the pond, so to speak. Because like when you first
Yeah.
go into some of those meetings, you're almost apprehensive because you don't want to take too much of the spotlight, but you want to get your point across because you're there to make business connections and you're there to
Mm-hmm.
actually thrive your business. The problem is usually is that people try too hard and I'm too representatory of my business. I'm throwing my business at you to where that's not always the case that's needed. Sometimes, you got to be quick, you got to be punctual, you got to say your 60 seconds and be done.
Right.
On the other hands, you can make a genuine connection, have a lengthy conversation without having to just blast somebody with all the information.
Absolutely. And I think that genuine piece is so important. I'm actually having this flashback to I went to an event and it was meant as a mixer and a learning, but certainly a networking piece to it, right? And had a conversation. I hesitate to say conversation because it didn't feel like a conversation with a woman. And at one point, I wanted to say to her, like, are you taking a networking class right now? Like, it just was very the canned questions, right? Nothing wrong with the questions. It just felt like rapid fire questions. And then it didn't feel genuine, like she was really interested in knowing those things. And, I don't say that to fault her. She might have been practicing something or giving it a try. And we're all at different stages, but it did stick out to me where I thought, I'm being networked. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to be networked.
It just
I feel like I'm getting worked over here. Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't feel the best. And I think for some people, again, that's just a harder hill to climb over, to just be a little more authentic and a little more genuine rather than, here's my business and here's my elevator and I've got to give you all this information and just take a breath, relax. Life's not that serious. Make the connections genuine.
Yeah. And, making the connections genuine. And I think you did a great job with this and it stood out, right? I was like, oh, this feels like clearly, Dylan, you wanted to make a connection. Of course you have business that you want to conduct, but it also felt like you really connected over the podcast. You found a commonality of, hey, Vivian does a podcast, I do a podcast. Yeah. And even at that point, I really appreciate you didn't even just jump immediately to like, hey, you should come be on my podcast or I should be on your podcast. But it was more, hey, can we just have a conversation about podcasts? Maybe there's something you can learn from me. I can learn from you. And so our first conversation was, even though I think we both knew it might lead in our minds, like, hey, this might lead to a podcast together. It might lead to business. It might lead to something. The first conversation was really like, what are you doing with your podcast? And like, what's working for you? And so that just felt good, right? Like it was reciprocal. It was fun. And part of what stood out in that conversation is you were talking about how you are using your podcast because it's an authentic way for you to connect with people, given your background, your style, what you love, to create connections. And I think one of the things you had brought up, and I also was like, okay, help me like with this because I think it connects dots for people. A lot of people might look at it and go, why is a insurance company hosting a podcast, talking to business? Like for some, it can feel too far removed. And as you and I were talking, I'm like, no, I totally see the connection. But tell us a little bit about UIA Trusted Partners podcast.
Sure.
How did that idea come about and how are you using it as a tool within your business, both in an authentic connection way and also to build business too?
Yeah, great set of questions there. So I'll kind of start with how it came to be was more so, I guess we'll start with the very first question you'd asked there. What is it? The UIA Trusted Partners podcast is at its core a networking podcast. It is free to come on. I prepare questions ahead of time. I send them to you to proof and make sure that everything's going to be good and representing your business the way it wants to be and yourself. We've implemented camera, which is a big step for a lot of people to come on and allow a camera on. Some people still will say, no, I just want on, which is fine. But camera also adds a human element, right? It's not just voices on a screen blabbering. It's, hey, I can now see this person. I can get a feel for this person as they're talking. You can see the passion coming out. And I think it just really helps those. Now, that being said, how this kind of originated was previous to my time here at UIA, was at a State Farm office. We left. My resume somehow landed on my current boss's desk. She calls me, and this was, I think, at like 3:00 or something in the afternoon. She calls me up and goes, "Are you a licensed insurance agent?" And I kind of laughed. I'm like, "Well, yeah, I just got my license like this year,
Yes, right.
And she goes, "Okay, So why is a radio DJ resume on my desk?
Right. Right.
So we kind of had a good little laugh about that. I come in for an actual in-face interview. Things go well. And right at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the conversation, she goes, okay, so her sister Connie, my boss, and I have this idea about a podcast. Could you do it? So we got to talking a little bit more. We're like, okay, well, what do we want it to be? What should it be? Well, let's make it an insurance podcast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, since our industry is just so
So
electrifying
regulated.
and
Yes.
so
And
riveting,
regulated.
and
Yeah.
we're just everybody's best friend right now.
Yeah.
It was just kind of an interesting conversation to have, and just be like, we got to make something that's going to not only be genuine for what we're trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll get to in just a moment, but genuine to giving back to our community that we actually care about and the people that we try to do business with and support in any way that we can. So then we kind of started dabbling with the idea of having, nonprofit segments and things like that. And that's all kind of down the road as this continues to build. We're coming up on the 1 year in February, but
Which is exciting.
I'm super excited. We'll get to
Yeah.
that in just a
That's
second as
awesome.
well. But what the core of this for the UIA? What does that do for me, right? What does the podcast do? How is it connected? What is it? Doesn't make sense. You have two and two.
Mm-hmm.
What it all boils down to is realistically, I am a licensed insurance agent. So I handle your property and your casualty, meaning your home and your auto. That also includes your business. So if you see that renewal, you don't like the number that you're going to see,
Mm-hmm.
it's something I can at least help with on that side of things. On the flip side of that coin, I also get to invite you on the show, have you as a guest, get to learn all about your business, whether that's 15 minutes, whether that's an hour and 15 minutes, anytime in between. It doesn't matter how long. I want I want to learn about it. I'm a curious
Yeah.
cat myself, so I ask too many questions usually. But it's just at the core of it, the end of the day, I ask you to give me a chance when you see that business renewal, when you see those personal renewals that you don't like. That's the core of it. That's the heart of it, right? That's how the
Mm-hmm.
insurance side of things gets its ball rolling, so to speak.
Sure.
But at the core of it, it is a true blue networking podcast to help grow local business here in Omaha and the surrounding towns.
Yeah. And I think that is so neat because we often are talking with our clients and people we work with about creating content.
Yeah.
And that's what a podcast is. It's creating content. And one of the things we often talk about is, sometimes we can get stuck as a business creating content only about us, only about what we do, our expertise. So we write blogs about things that we know and love and want to have other people know and love.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, depending on where you're at in connecting with people in your funnel, you sometimes miss the content that just hooks people as a human with similar common interests, right?
Yeah.
So, you're not making a podcast about raising toddlers because that really starts to have a separation there. But making that kind of top of the funnel content that helps people just feel interested. What is that over there? Who are those folks? They seem interested in things I'm interested in. It seems like we might have some common ground. And they are interested and they're friendly and, telling my story. And so I love this as an example. And part of why I wanted to talk with you is like, okay, what is a networking podcast, right? People talk about what are the different ways I can network. And I'm like, well, Dylan's doing it over here with a podcast, which makes so much sense to me, especially as an introvert. It's hard for me to network with 20 people in the room, but having a meaningful, deep conversation and then being able to connect that person to other people, that's networking, right? And so you are truly networking in a podcast format for your business. But I love that piece that you talked to. Part of networking is helping give value to them and bring connections to, and you already, since I've known you, Dylan, you've sent me a number of people as possible guests and I've run into, and they're like, oh yeah, Dylan, I met him over here. So your name is starting to be brought up, right?
Well, that's good.
Over and over and over again. So I think it's just a beautiful example that sometimes people don't think about when they, one, are thinking about networking and two, thinking about podcasts. both
Yeah.
questions that come up a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm happy to keep sending folks your way because, again, I think that's just part of it is you're doing on this show a great service to business owners, entrepreneurs, and really setting them up for a good start forward rather than just saying, hey, welcome to the highlight reel of this podcast. And by the way, you can get the full thing if you pay. And it's just not that way, right? And it's so
Yeah.
inviting and it's so welcoming and it's very, very healthy to help build all those people around you. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy to refer people over to you for the podcast because just like how it can translate to a business conversation for myself, it hopefully can do the same thing for you.
Yeah, I love it. So for those interested in finding the podcast, we'll link and everything on. Is it on every platform? Is there a preferred platform for the UIA Trusted Partners podcast?
Yeah, you can find every episode on Spotify. We are currently in the works of getting everything moved to YouTube as well, but YouTube is current as of, I think we started making it current with either 101 Brick or 101 Mobility or Brickway Brewery. One of those two
Okay,
episodes, I
fun.
think it's current from that forward, maybe a little bit before that.
Mm-hmm.
But YouTube and Spotify are the two main places. We are looking to kind of grow that in 2025, of course.
Awesome.
We wanted to at least get 1 year down and then see about the
Yeah.
growth pattern there.
Is there something that sticks out, surprising, interesting, and aha, just that you've learned about the Omaha and surrounding business community since hosting the podcast?
People really like the zoo.
Yeah.
No,
It's a great
I
zoo.
tease. Yeah, actually, I've gotten quite a few that, some people will just say, I want people to know more about this, or I want somebody to know more about this, or you should be supporting this. And a lot of times it's small nonprofits or it's, hole in the wall kind of business, or sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's art galleries and things like that we have around that people are like, you guys need to go see this because it's right here in Omaha.
Yeah.
And I jokingly on my podcast call us over here in Omaha a little spoiled with how much we have to do over here. We've got the Luminarium, we've got the zoo, the College World Series, and it keeps going on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's nice to ask people to take a moment to reflect some of that because I ask on my show as well, what's your Mount Rushmore? What should I come in from out of town to come see kind of thing? And
Yeah.
I think that gives people kind of a moment to realize, wow, I can't really pick because, I'm really loving this restaurant. Or, no, I love going to this one, though. Or this is our classic date night. And, there's just so much. And I
That
love
sense of
that.
pride.
Yeah, exactly. I love that sense of pride when that gets reflected from my guests' answers.
That's cool. I love that. So thinking about this a little bit, creating content is part of how we attract people into our business. It's that top, right? The attract,
Yeah.
and then we engage, and then we connect. That's kind of a simplified marketing funnel, if you
Broad
will.
stroke of the brush
Broad
there.
strokes, yes. When people are thinking about starting a podcast, what kinds of advice might you have for them? They're thinking, I kind of like this idea of a networking podcast. I could do a networking podcast for my industry or in my area. We have listeners for Writing Tandem all over the U.S.
Well, hey.
So what might you give them as advice? How can they use it in a strategic way?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really, really good question. I'll give you two versions of it. I'll give you the radio version.
Perfect.
Right? Radio guy
Will you
version.
use your radio voice, please?
In Radio Land, you want to find yourself I believe this is the 420 Dynamic Pro microphone, and you want to get yourself one of these, have it hooked into a boom arm. Have that basically about here to where I always say your pinky to your thumb away from your chin. So that's the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, this is the radio answer because this is a not cheap microphone.
Right.
This is not one of the microphones we use on my show. Now, as a radio guy as well, I would also recommend an audio board. I happen to have all of these things in my office. Don't worry about that. No reason whatsoever, but an audio board can make your life way, 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 way easier. You just have to have the correct microphones to use it. Now, the microphone I showed you is one of the correct microphones to fit here, which is an XLR hookup, for those of you who don't know. Or you can just call it a 3-pin hookup. A lot of people will know what you're talking about. But it allows me to control everything more accurately. This is something I would definitely recommend. This is on Amazon for like $80. So, I mean, it's very, very affordable of an option. Now, that said, you know, you go, Dylan, you just said you just had a really expensive microphone up there. I did. That's not the ones we use, of course. I actually, again, I have all this in my office. Don't judge me. But we used, I know it's backwards on the camera, this brand on Amazon. You can find it. It was a package. It comes with everything that you see in this, and it was $80.
Nice.
So I want to point those price points out because a lot of times people get into the weeds of having this microphone that costs $170+, and this microphone that's got to do all these great things. And I can tell you for a fact that they go to plug that in and they hate the way that they sound and they think it's the microphone's fault. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, you've never heard yourself recorded.
Yes.
So buying unnecessary equipment is never the right answer. Buying too cheap of equipment, however, can fault you as well. We did kind of a bare bones setup to start because we wanted to see if this was a workable idea, if it was a tangible idea, if we can actually perform this, right? So those ones that I represented and shown, they have good audio to them. Are there better microphones? Absolutely. But, you know, if you're looking to keep things budget friendly and you're looking to start things, that's the way I would go. Because on the flip side of that, when you're looking at the computer side of things, you go, okay, well, I've got my microphone. I don't have an audio board. I'm just going to use a USB microphone. That's fine. Just make sure that you have some sort of software that can plug into it, which most can, and you can actually get a lot of free software. That's the best part, is there's so much free software out there.
A lot more you can do that way. Yes.
Yes. And from the beginning of our concept, we've always recorded it as a video file because I knew at some point we'd be adding video to it. That's not everybody has to do that. You can use Audacity. That's a great audio-free program that is very user-friendly. It works phenomenal. The problem that you're going to have with that is if you try to run two USB microphones into the same computer, it can't read the difference. So you have to have an audio board. That's just a heads up for anybody that's wanting to do that. I'll save you hours of headache and hours of beating your head into the wall with digital audio boards and everything like that. It does not work. So with all that said, it's not extremely hard to pull off and it's not extremely expensive to pull off if you can keep your costs down on that side of things and keep your show intentional.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem that, like you had said, people get too caught up in the weeds with trying to create content. And I was hosting a podcast today, so that's why I'm also a little bit scratchy in the voice. This is just to kind of give people a little preview of like how I kind of do my show.
Your notes.
So I have all these questions, and this is page 1. Here's page 2.
Yes.
But I have all these notes and things as I go, and that's not to make me look like a cool professional of any kind, but that's to kind of show that there is put in focus and effort, and there is a concise things that I'm looking for, asking, and I'm doing my research ahead of time. That
was something I noticed when I was a guest on yours. Like you had really combed our website.
Maybe.
You knew things, about our organization. You asked really intentional questions about the organization in a way to highlight, you really shine a light on your businesses. You've shown a light on Tandem Works and what we do. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a piece that I wanted to be sure that people are hearing. There's lots of different podcasts out there, right? Like, so for example, Writing Tandem is not, I wouldn't call it a networking podcast. Certainly networking happens.
Sure.
It's a beautiful piece of it. But what I am hoping people are picking up is that, Dylan, you're truly using it as a networking podcast. That's even how you describe it. And like you're saying, it takes preparation. It's not about just having, how am I trying to say this? Like when you go into a networking event, we always tell folks, like, kind of know who's going to be in the room, have done a little research, think about who you might want to meet. It translates the same, even though it's a different platform, there's some prep work there that if you want to make a podcast that's truly a networking podcast, I felt really good and valued because you gave an opportunity for me to talk about our business in a very unique way. You asked pointed questions that drew out of me what Tandem Works is all about, the services we offer. That felt good, right, on that side. And I knew that as I was answering those questions, anyone listening, if they were interested, they were going to reach out. And so it truly had this networking feel about it that was also just very fun and different, and a different, fresh way of doing that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because the prep work was evident. And I think that contributes to it truly being a networking podcast.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I do try to put in reasonable amount of effort, because that's also another thing. Don't get caught up in the weeds trying to plan everything out. Old broadcast adage is Murphy rides shotgun in everything that you do. Murphy, of course, referring to Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Will go wrong.
So just always plan that Murphy's riding shotgun with you. You can have a good script laid out. You can have good questions laid out. But you might tell me an answer that makes half of my questions irrelevant, because now I'm curious about what that was.
Yeah.
So it's really about having intentionality, but then, again, doing your research, because I needed to know the right questions to ask. There's a difference between asking somebody a question and then asking somebody the right questions, or like you had said, pointed questions of, hey, I want to know like this little gem about your business, or I saw this on the website and it's just this little overlooked maybe piece of information that you just go, how did you see that? Yeah, just that kind of stuff. And I think it's really important that people, if you don't have that kind of brain to sit there and formulate all these questions and things, talk to somebody in your office, or if it's just you, do some networking and pick some people's brains on how to ask intentional or pointed questions, because that is honestly a big game changer.
I agree. And being able to ask good questions is a good skill just to develop in general as a business owner. Okay, so speaking of good questions, how do you find guests for a networking podcast? You're being intentional about the questions you're asking. It would lead one to believe that you're probably being intentional about the guests that you're inviting on.
Well, would it surprise you to say that I'm not extraordinarily intentional with how I do my podcast guests?
Okay, yeah, tell us more.
So I think a lot of it boils down to people are busy. People have lives. And so what I find is the most difficult about this podcast in general is pinning people down. It's, hey, give me a time. I'll try to work around you. That's kind of what I try to do on my side of things, to help compensate and help meet people halfway there, to just show them like, hey, olive branch, kind of here we are. I got you some days that I'm free. What are you thinking? And I think that it's more or less, you see the people that are coming on because these are the people that have wanted to connect. They're interested in the show. Maybe they just wanted more information to start. There's a couple of them that started that way, of just, we heard about it, or we saw you at the networking. We met you. You seem nice. We just want to know what it is. How much does it cost? And all that kind of stuff that I have to go through with people. And I try to clarify all those questions for everybody, which it's free to come on, by the way.
Yes.
Yes, for everybody. But it's very, I'm trying to find a different word than interesting, but it's very interesting with how people can get something. It's absolutely free, 100%. It's all you. Put it to work, do your thing with it, and nothing.
Yes.
Pin drops.
Well, podcasts can feel intimidating to folks. They're not sure, what if I say something, and I can't take it back, or they're worried about hearing their own voice, and all those things.
And I think a big fear for people is, not only if I say something wrong, is it going to be stuck there? I think a big fear for people is like the left hook question, right? If we're sitting here, we're talking about networking, and all of a sudden you just go, okay, and due to the recent election, how's your vote? And just throw a question out of nowhere that has nothing to do with what we're doing. And I think that people have that kind of fear because of mainstream media that does that to people.
I was going to say, the news. I do tell people all the time, this is not the news.
Right.
I'm here to make you, look good and shine a good light, and that. But that's true. That's a good point. So being able to help people through those fears.
Yeah. Which is kind of why I send those questions out ahead of time, not to script the show necessarily, because I go off those questions and I'll tangent off if you say something that I wanted more information about. I won't stick true blue to those questions. but they're there to help people prepare. And I tell people it's not a script. If you say something and I deviate, just be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a conversation at the very end of it. It's not bullet point, I give answer,
Soundbite.
bullet point, I give answer. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That I love that you're talking about that too. And for those who haven't maybe checked out what a networking podcast can look like, I think yours is a great example
Thank you.
of what that can look like, where, to your point, when you were first, not when you were first talking about it, as you explained it, I totally understood. But when you first said a networking podcast, I did think, oh gosh, is it going to be like, so you want me to come on and do a sales pitch, right? And you right away made it clear that that was not it. But I hope as people are thinking through this, like, oh, would a podcast be something I want to do? One of the first things I would ask yourself is, one, do you love or hate speaking? If you hate speaking and that's probably not for you. There's other ways to network. But if you do love speaking, you like to ask insightful questions, you're curious, you're genuinely curious, it might be a great way for you to consider doing networking for your business. And it's important when you're doing that you do keep it authentic, conversational. So though you're shining a light, like you don't want it to turn into, it would be boring, right? If it just stuck to, tell me about your business, give me your pitch, Craig, great. Like here's the next person.
Yep.
And I think you have a great example through your podcast of how not to do that, how to keep it like very fun, very engaging, but at the same time, I really got to pitch our business. And so I thought that was it's a unique way of doing it. I love that a lot.
I appreciate that because that is kind of how I wanted the fluidity, so to speak, of the show to be. I wanted it at its core to be what you, the business, is trying to represent, what you as a person wants to represent, while still being methodical about the questions, to where it's not just, okay, tell me about Tandem Works and offer everything for the clients. And at what price can I buy this amazing service?
Yes.
And it just,
a commercial.
yeah, it's like there's people that pay for advertising and stuff like that. If you want a short, concise commercial, hey, you know what? I know a guy. I could probably write one myself for you even.
Yes.
But I wanted it to be more meaningful than just here's a spotlight, here's 15 minutes and go.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about what are the benefits that you have found for your business, for your organization? Because you are an insurance agent. You can help people with their insurance. You do the podcast as content creation in order to help feed that. So what kind of benefits have you found? Do people contact you for work, or has it led to a great connection to help build your work or to find a mentor? Like, kind of talk through some of the benefits that you've reaped from creating content the way you have.
Yeah, I think a lot of the benefit for me has been a lot of personal. It's been a lot of very, very touching to get to know some of these people on a little bit of a background story and a little bit of a how did this even happen story before I really step in to try to be, hey, I'm your agent. And I think that's kind of a really impactful piece for me, I'll say, on that piece, because while it's great when they want to do business and we want to reach out and have that conversation, I want to have that understanding that I'm not there just to have the business conversation, because then I'm no better than Joe Blow down the block that just wants your paycheck and, all right, you've got insurance, here you go. I want it to be a little more personal than that. And I think that's kind of something I'm starting to now see through the podcast. About hitting a year, people are a little more familiarity with it and a little more comfortable with it. People are starting to hit their renewals as well, to where, hey, you know what? I was on the show. Let's talk to him for a minute. Or, hey, let's ask what goes into this quote or something like that, to where I can at least answer some questions for people. And even if that's just cracking the door wider, that's what it's about, is building that snowball effect to where they will give me that chance when they ultimately want to.
Yeah, I love that. That is huge. I think the relationship building, I think so often people think of networking and they are looking for a quick sale, right? Like it's hard to realize that networking is not a grocery store ad, right? A grocery store ad is you have by Wednesday to come in and get your peaches for the low cost of XYZ. That's not how networking works. And so that's a great point of, you're coming up on a year, you've been diligent, putting the work in, you're reaping reward along the way. And it's not always about having a check written immediately, but it always leads to good things. And I always tell people too, like, to have the money conversation, it will lead to a check at some point, whether it's direct or indirect or 3 times removed. If you're doing good work, you're connecting it, you're making sure you're staying authentic, you're connecting with your audience in a genuine way, it will lead to eventually having check, right?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes that part gets skipped around a little bit. Oh, authenticity and make good connections. It's like, okay, yeah, that's great. So just to give people hope too, of like, it will lead to
It will.
profit at some point too. And there is nothing wrong with that, right? There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I just like to demystify that a
Yeah,
little bit
and
too.
it's great to do that because I think you're absolutely right. People walk in there and they go, "All right," especially my industry is very guilty of this. I personally am not, but my industry is, unfortunately, where
Yeah.
we walk in, we go, "Hey, there's the real estate agent," and "Hey, there's the financial advisor. We're going to go
Yes.
talk to those guys," and we
Right.
try to get something right then and there. And
Mm-hmm.
to your point, that's just not, it's not realistic. Don't expect
Mm-hmm.
that if you start the networking process, because a lot of people have been doing network for quite a long time. There's some people that are brand new, fresh, that you're going to meet just as fresh as you are. But the real big thing to keep in mind is go in there with the intention to build a relationship or to make even a companion, a use, like acquaintance is the word I'm trying to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Go in there with that intentionality, and I guarantee you're going to have a lot better conversations than walking in there looking for a sale.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, deviating a little bit away from the podcast, but still connected, there's some other unique ways that your organization is thinking about creating meaningful connections. I see about your annual event maybe coming up. When you think about networking, we've been talking about the podcast as a unique way of doing that. Throughout your career, have you found other unique ways that are maybe a little outside the norm to be able to connect with people, or that you have found where you're like, this is kind of a neat way to connect with people that's a little outside of the ordinary?
It's kind of odd, but just kind of different, like center sphere chapter events or like different things like that. Because I remember, yeah, I'll think back to when my chapter had done something like this. And Center Sphere is a networking organization here in Omaha. I think they're in Iowa as well, I
They
believe,
are,
and
yes.
they're around. They're a lot.
Yes.
There's a
Yes.
lot of them. But I remember when my chapter was doing this little outing, we were going to have this little get together, open doors, anybody can come on out. We had done it at a mobile cigar lounge. Uh,
Okay.
Shout outs to Torch and Cutter. They're really, really cool. We have an episode with him. Really,
That's
really cool
fun.
episode. Really, really cool place.
Okay.
During that little outing, I had met a different insurance agent. She was with State Farm. Perfectly nice. We can get along. We don't have to be cats in a bag. But we had also made the connection with a friend of the show or friend of the podcast on my end,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Jim Rusk with Christensen Cleaning Company. Now, I'd never met Jim. And during about the 45 minutes that I had kind of hung out, had a cigar, just kind of, shot back and forth with each other's little conversation here. And just during that short time, him and I made such a great connection that I invited him on the show. He was on the show a week later. When that episode got posted, within 24 hours, he had 20 views
Wow, that's
because he
awesome.
was just blasting it out and he was just the guy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I love giving him a shout out. I am thrilled through the roof that he was just that genuine and that, excited to be a part of something that was, he could see the vision for it. Right. And
Yes.
so he believed in the vision as well. So it was just very, very cool. And same with a good friend of the show, Starting Strength Fitness, Aaron Frederick. Same thing. He saw the idea. He sees where it's going. He knows what the mission is for it and he loves it and he wanted to get in on it too. So
Mm-hmm.
I love both those companies and those businesses, those gentlemen. They're great people. And yeah, I think it's just a really fun, unique experience in general.
Yeah, that's so cool. And gosh, you could bring up such great examples that I'm like, see, this is why you're here. This is why you're here. So what I love about what you just said beyond checking out those episodes, which will be awesome, I want to just be like, hey, like pause button here for everyone, right? Like pause, reflect on what Dylan just said. They jumped onto your vision and they became champions for you and they poured into you. You know, you invite them on, they get to have an interview. So it's part of this networking that's happening through the podcast. But they took it, championed it, and now what just happened? You literally called them out by name, championed them again because there was that exchange of excitement, right?
Yep.
And you know, sometimes people are like, oh no, you rub my back, I'll rub yours, and this, like,
I always
yeah,
love
but like, there's a genuineness here of they were excited, you're excited. You can't help but talk about what you're excited about. And so if you
yeah.
can create delight for people in such a way that they just can't help talking about you, that really is networking. You know, that's
Yeah.
the beauty and the magic of it.
It really is. And just to kind of give you guys a little sneak here, I have my rankings pulled up.
Okay.
So Tada Home Solutions is my number one still. She has not been toppled yet.
Ta-da.
Tada, taking your to-do list from to-do to Tada. It's
That's
Tada Home
awesome.
Solutions.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm like their tagline at this
This
point.
is this is where we ask Todd to insert applause here, please.
Thank you, Todd. But after that, it goes. Aaron Frederick was starting Strength Fitness. He had 2 episodes that he did. He did one before he had a brick and mortar location, and I guaranteed him a spot when he had one to come back on the show. Both of his episodes are the next 2 in line, and then
Nice.
Christensen Cleaning Company, and then followed up with the amazing nonprofit Set Me Free Project and Restored Wings.
Yeah.
That is an episode worth watching in itself. That's about preventing human trafficking and if you can't, what happens after that. So powerful episodes, very cool stuff. I just wanted to point out some of those amazing businesses, not to slight anybody else or say
Yeah.
you guys don't share your stuff. Plenty of folks do. Those have just been some of the really, really adamant ones of just, hey, we share it all the time. We talk about it all the time. We promote it all the time.
Yeah, and what an important piece of networking. You know, I was actually just saying and putting on my calendar because I'm going to raise my hand here and say, I was doing a fabulous job about this about a week and a half ago. And then this last other half the week, I have felt like, oh my gosh, you know, you have these connections with people and you say, oh, you need to meet so and so, or I can connect you with such and such. And are you following up and doing that? Right. And right now, I'm in a season where I'm behind. I have tabs pulled up of the people I've talked to. Dylan is one of them. So I'm just going to confess right here, right? I'm saying this while also saying I understand how life goes. But following up and doing what you say is so important. If you said, oh, you really need to meet so and so, be sure to make the introduction happen. And Dylan, I have to give kudos to because you have done that and you've done it very quickly. And that also helps with that relationship, right? So one of the things I do, because I struggle at times where I end up like meeting. I have 18 million people to connect with other people.
Yep.
And the fact is that's not billable work yet, right? It's not billable work yet. And so you have to like weigh and juggle between these. So one of the things that I do with that is I try to do it right away if I can. Sometimes I'll do it during the meeting. So here's like my hacks because I'm not perfect at this. Sometimes I do it during the meeting. I'll say, hold up 1 minute. I'm literally sending you an email between so-and-so and so-and-so because I know that it's going to take me a minute to get to it. The other thing I do is we use Asana. And so after every meeting, I keep my notes or I go back and look at my calendar and I put in, I need to follow up. So Dylan's actually in my Asana right now, and it still says only half of the follow-ups are done, right? So, but that's just the reality of it. But keeping track of that so that I can follow up, even if it's a week later than I wanted, the fact is that you're doing it. And I think that stands out because how many times have you had a conversation with somebody and then they never followed up, right? So nice if you can do it right away. That's awesome. If your life and your business can't support that, find a way that you can follow up because late is better than never in this case, for sure.
Yeah. My piece of advice on that one is point in case here. at the very bottom of my podcast today, I have Vivian's name.
Ah, look at that. My name's right there.
Name is right there, literally recorded today. And as we were talking to this episode, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to make a note. I know I need to connect you guys because it's just going to benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to your point too is just find a system that will work. There's always going to be something that will take up your time. I will tell you that right now, that you can always find something to take your time.
For sure.
But if you, like, to your point, if you can't get it now, do it a couple days later. That's fine. Somebody would rather hear from you a few days later than never at all. And it's just Ghostville, USA. And then they hear
Yes.
your name again, a while later, and they go, oh yeah, they blew me off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you just destroyed what you're trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
So it is just one of those, be consistent with how you do things. Try to find a good system that will benefit and work with you, not against you.
Yes. That's huge. And give yourself some grace, right?
Yes.
If it doesn't happen right away, it doesn't mean that it can't happen a little bit later.
Your hair doesn't catch fire, I promise.
It hasn't happened yet.
It may feel like it, but it won't do it.
So a bit of a segue here, but I'm like, gosh, there's two things we can really, there's more than two things. There's two main topics, right? Like there's this networking and everything, but I do want to give people a little smattering of, we haven't really talked insurance on the podcast before. I'm like, okay, so though it's an abrupt segue, I'd love to ask you a couple questions about just insurance and business and like, what are the things that you wish business owners knew beyond podcasting for networking about insurance, that side of everything you're doing? It can seem like a very transactional industry.
It can come off that way, very much so. And unfortunately, even the best of the agents out there, the very tip top of the iceberg, so to speak, sometimes it's just going to feel that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to think those agents are great agents for a reason. You got to trust them that they've got your well-being in mind. Whether, they're talking to you every week or every month or following up with you, maybe it's just a quick happy birthday note just once a year to kind of just keep in touch with you. Or like here in the office, if we notice something with your renewals, we'll give you a call. Or you guys call us. And it's one of those that, hey, we don't like what we're seeing. Okay, let us take a look around then. You've asked us to take a look. Let's go take a look. See if we can't find something better for you. And I think for people and just for businesses alike to understand that Nebraska is, woo, we're insurance. We're there. And I jokingly kind of make that little facade here because in Nebraska, now I'm also licensed in Iowa, funny enough, because Nebraska and Iowa share insurance laws.
Okay.
So I'm licensed over here in Iowa as well as Nebraska. That said, in Nebraska, we have now eclipsed the number one spot for the total loss premium per state.
Okay.
Not good.
Yeah.
That's definitely not good. That's like, you don't want that. You want to be like number 50 on that list.
Right.
So there's that.
Is that because of like natural disasters or
hailstorms, tornadoes?
Because we've had some whoppers of.
Yeah, unfortunately, Iowa had
and Iowa as well
this year. Yeah, you guys had some pretty nasty damage over your way as well, which didn't help your guys' rates any, but not as astronomical of a hike as what we're seeing on our side of the river, which is not to say that what you guys haven't gone through is not bad or
for sure.
Not to do any of that. But one thing to keep in mind is a lot of companies are changing perspectives. They're trying to get a new norm in place to where it's, hey, this is not I got a couple of hail dings in my roof, I'm going to file a claim. It's just not the case anymore. It's one of those that you're also going to be seeing deductible conversations happen. If you already have not had that conversation, I'd love to know who you have. It's just one of those that we're seeing certain things go away because it's just not profitable for companies. It's not profitable for them as a business. Insurance providers have to be profitable to pay you the claim that you're trying to get. So there has to be a give and a take, and there has to be a learning curve a little bit. I actually, again, not to shamelessly plug the podcast over and over, but I did an episode with Farmers Mutual of Nebraska. They are a Nebraska organization of insurance. They are in South Dakota and I believe North Dakota as well. They're phenomenal. They're an amazing company to work with, but I talk to them verbatim what's happening in this industry, what are the changes to expect. And my rep that was on the show is extremely knowledgeable, and she was able to come on after a little process of going back and forth with the company, and we had a really informative episode. And I think that people can really benefit from that, because
Awesome.
there's a lot of insurance shop talk in that episode, and there's a lot more
Excellent.
concise talk about it. But again, deductibles, I doubt you'll see your deductibles ever come back. Sorry, Nebraskans, your $1,000 deductibles are, unless
Yeah.
it's your car,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's just some of the industry kind of shifts and changes. Commercial property has kind of been in that same field, unfortunately. So it's been tough for businesses to accept those risks. And I think that's why, we've seen a lot of growing pains in our industry this year. And I think, we're just going to have to brace in a little bit. We're just going to have that conversation with your agent, wherever that person may be, whomever that person may be, if you should file a claim or not.
Yeah.
Now,
That's good.
as my job as the insurance agent, I want you to tell me everything that just happened. I'm going to give you my opinion if you should file that claim or not. Whether or not you file or not, it's completely up to you. I'm not going to tell you don't file. I'm just going to give you advice and say it is up to you to file. If it were me, XYZ or ABC.
Yeah. That's good. And I'm glad for you to say that. Just like it is okay to have the conversations. And, that's one of the things I think you had mentioned here. Like one of the big myths is that you get to decide what it costs.
I wish I had the magic wand.
Yes, wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
But having the conversation, like don't hesitate to have the conversation, right? I think that's an important piece there as well. And I love how you had here a little twist on this. You had just mentioned too about overcoming hesitations about discussing prices with clients, which every business owner can relate to. This is not specific to giving insurance quotes and talking about prices. So how have you overcome those hesitations? Like what golden nuggets can we glean from you? Because we all have to do it. Here's what XYZ costs.
Yeah. So in my industry, sometimes that conversation is a little tough. Again, it's because there's so much insurance provided out there. There's a lot of options, right? So the 7 or 8 options that I work with, you might still be able to find 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9 outside of what I work with. I work with only A-rated companies, so that's always something to keep in mind too, of who you're going with, if they're A-rated or not. That can help play a factor into that. I blanked on your question again. Repose that for me.
Yeah. So you have to bring up, okay, this
yes.
is what it costs. We all have to do that. What, like, do you do a mental workout first? Are you like doing push-ups before you say, okay, and here's the price tag? Because we all have to say the price tag at some point on our services.
No, unfortunately, I'm a little more straightforward into it. I'll send that client their email, tell them, hey, give me a call when you see this. We can go through this, right? So we'll walk through those lines, and they're always the first question, is that how much I'm paying? Yeah, let me explain why. Let me point out why. A lot of times what we see is somebody who is got state minimum coverage, which in Nebraska is $25,000, $50,000. Now that's per incident, per occurrence kind of thing, just for the random numbers out there so people don't get confused. And what we find a problem with that is, how much is a Lexus? How much is a brand new latest model of insert car here? Their $25,000 or $50,000 does not go a long way anymore.
Sure.
So a lot of times you'll have somebody on state minimum coverage, or maybe the next step up of 5100s, which is better. At least that's better. The problem is that is a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper to have state minimums than it is to have proper coverage like 100, 300s or 250, 500s. Now, we here in UIA like to propose people with 250, 500s for your limits. Those are some of the highest limits, because you can get what's called an umbrella policy with that. Now, your umbrella, I'm sure you've all seen the commercials. I'm sure I can over explain things for everybody here real quick, but here's your home, here's your auto, the umbrella goes right over it. So if your liability, let's say you get in a really bad accident and you have up to $100,000 of liability coverage there, but it's going to go past that because maybe you're getting sued. Maybe you were in the wrong and it's a bad accident. That umbrella kicks in past that coverage up to $1 million, $2 million, whatever we had written that for. Again, the conversation about proposing the money and talking about that is difficult. But if you can talk through the initial, well, why am I paying so much?
Mm-hmm.
If you can work the angle of, here's why. I need to be able to very clearly tell you because of A, you're seeing B. If I can't do that, you as my client or future client is going to go, okay, yeah, I see the proposal. I'm going to think about it for
Yeah.
a little bit and I'm going to get back to you. And I don't hear from you ever again.
Yeah, that explaining piece I think is huge. And I'm glad you brought that up. There were two things that stuck out to me there the most. One is, so you send over the quote, and that would be the same for an industry. You send over whether it's a quote or a proposal
Yep.
or, your proposed invoice. There's RFPs, all the things that you are
Absolutely.
responding with. When you send that over, you are inviting a call right away. And I think that's huge. I think this is a mistake that can be made that I have made at the early in business where you send it over and then you're like, it's like you just like drop it on the table and you run, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, here it is. And, let me know. And you kind of like run away, which does not inspire confidence, right? If you're not confident enough to say, and I'm more than happy to call and explain and you'll hear my voice or we can talk this through. I think that inspires confidence of I'm not ashamed of this price. Or I don't have, this is the best price I can get in your, case, but I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not just going to drop it in the middle of the table and run. 2, let's have a conversation about it so I can walk you through it. And I think that is huge. And you brought that up. We try to do that within 24 hours. If at all possible, I try to do it the moment I send it. So I'll send it and I try to call them immediately if I can, if time allows, and just say, hey, I just sent it over. I want to make sure. Can you open it in your inbox? Great. Can I walk you through it? Because you said it perfectly. They open it and your brain goes, oh my word, about whatever. I don't get it. I don't understand. And I want to be there to help guide them through that thought process. And then the other thing that stuck out to me that you said is, can you explain it? Can you get into the details? Can you explain why? Can you go from point A to point B with confidence and grace and explain, yes, this costs this because of this, and not being ashamed to say, when I was in the wedding industry, we would charge thousands of dollars for a wedding, let's say, and you could get a wedding shot by someone else for hundreds of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make that choice, but I had to be able to explain the reason why you're spending thousands of dollars with us is, and I could point out the 3 to 4 reasons why. And I wasn't hesitant and not snarky about it, right? It's not defensive,
Yep.
but just explaining, when we edit your pictures, we spend about 8 to 10 hours on the pictures. While we're at the wedding, it's about 8 to 10 hours there, and then we're so glad to be able to, invite you in for this consultation, et cetera, et cetera. So couching it in such a way that people understand, because they don't know what they don't know, and that's not their fault.
Exactly.
So that's what I heard you saying,
Yep.
throughout that and your process there.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. People don't know what they don't know, and it never hurts to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you touched on it, and I didn't touch on it on this one. So to further evaluate on what you just said, you point out the 2 or 3 things. You don't go in the weeds. Don't go into the weeds with it. Don't sit there and I'm not going to break down coverage
Line
A
by
through.
line.
Yeah, I'm not going to go A through Y with you unless you are literally asking me to.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of that coverage is not something that I need to go through with you. Some of it's just standard coverages that are offered through companies. The coverages that matter are the ones I'm going to go through with you. The ones that
Mm-hmm.
I need to make sure you have the right property amount. I need to make sure that your property is insured for the right amount. If I tip your house upside down and pour everything out, is that enough coverage there? So
Right.
those are questions that I need to be very mindful of and point out and talk specifically about these things. And then, the ribbon work. So you're putting the ribbon on the bow kind of thing on the present. The ribbon work, the final steps of it are a lot cleaner at that point.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks so much for bringing just through that process, because I
My
do,
pleasure.
again, it's such a hard one for people. And so just talking through, the ways that you can send a quote over and be able to have confidence with it is huge.
Yeah, and it's even like if you want to send something on a Friday, that's
Mm,
perfectly fine. I send quotes over on Fridays. I'll send it to the person and I'll just include an email. Hey, I have a shorter day in the office on Fridays. I'm about to leave for the day. However, take a look through everything. Let me know if I need to make any changes. I'm going to follow up with you Monday. It's not
yeah.
a, hey, reach out to me on Monday. It's, I'm going to talk to you Monday. Tell me over the weekend if I need to have anything prepared before I do. I'm
Yeah.
trying to set it up that way for my client or future client to be ready to have that conversation.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to have you back on and talk more about a whole bunch of things,
I'd
which
be more than happy to.
I know for sure. Everyone is like, yeah, you say that every time, Vivian. And I'm like, because I'm so curious and I want to know more.
The door's always open.
Awesome. I do have a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Love it.
Some kind of fun stuff, some kind of deep stuff. Just meant to be
Oh,
off the cuff here.
all right, let me
Okay?
go.
Look at, have a drink. Here we go. What do you think are some of the misconceptions? Though, like you said, you're like, I don't own a business, but you've talked with a lot of business owners. So I really want your perspective on this. What do you think is some of the biggest misconceptions about owning a business? What have you picked
That's a
up?
good question. I've gotten a lot of good answers off of that on my show, but I think the one of the more common ones that I see is again, know your audience, know your
Mm,
market, know your niche, what you're trying to do, that kind of thing. Have that, of course, solidified before you do anything. I think one of the coolest episodes was Dough and Co. It's a local shop here in La Vista, and it's edible raw cookie dough. They don't
yes.
have a brick and mortar. All
Yeah.
they do is pop ups, and they have little places that have their supplies in, which is genius because now they're
Hmm.
eliminating that overhead cost initially of having a brick and mortar. They're eliminating that need to have insurance for a building instead of just general liability insurance.
Mm,
So there's a lot of things to be smart about. If
yeah.
you're in an industry or trying to go into an industry that you don't need something, double check. Make sure you don't need it to start. It's something of being a commodity, right? We live in the era of it's shiny, I want. And
Yes.
it's very easy to get caught up in that, like, well, that business has a building. I want a building. My business is just as good as theirs. It
Yes.
is, but you have to let it get to that point. And I think that's the big thing that business owners tend to, unfortunately, step on their own head to get underneath the water there because they're trying so hard to bring their vision to life that they lose sight of the vision. I think
Mm,
is some of the biggest things that I've gathered through my podcast of just stay focused, stay true, and just don't do the unnecessary stuff right off the bat to see if it works. Stick with what you know. What does work?
I love that. And Donko, I think, is going to be a podcast guest here soon. I know we were chatting with
Yeah,
them. So, yes, thank you, Dylan, for that one.
I'll be watching that episode. That was a very very fun episode. That's a father daughter team.
That's
So
fun. Very fun. Speaking of just fun, when you just want to relax, what's a favorite snack or beverage? What do you like to kick back with? Tell us more about you.
oh, cracking open the Pandora box here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, besides the vast array of Hawaiian shirts that are in my closet that usually I'm rocking, I'm not today. I'm a little disappointed. I am wearing a very loud and obnoxious shirt,
Yes,
but
color, lime and
um,
green.
I love to go home. And first off, I'm kind of a cook. I like to cook. I If I can grill, I'll grill, which is most of the year round. Unless it's
Yeah,
really, really bitter cold out, then I'm not stepping outside. But
yeah.
I like to get ready to cook supper that night. I'll crack open Line and Kugel's summer shandy.
Mm.
Big summer shandy guy. Love a lot of different citrusy things are my jam. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, I play a little Xbox, kind of hang out. I do a variety of different things, whether that's, if it's weekends. Funny enough, being an insurance agent, this is probably going to make people go. But I also play D&D on the weekends. I play
Okay,
Magic the Gathering with some friends. Like
cool.
they're mentally stimulating activities,
Yeah.
ironically enough, that
No, that's
get me to
great.
wind down.
Perfect. Is there a book or a podcast that just really inspires you right now or that you love to talk to people about?
Yeah, there's actually a couple that I really like. So some of my favorites are kind of still from even high school.
Yeah,
The Rick Riordan books of The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Always had a big thing for Greek mythology, and I've been a big history buff throughout my life.
very
So those are
cool.
really fun. I do have a book that I always tend to revisit throughout the years, and it's called As You Wish. So if you're familiar with The Princess Bride,
Yes, yeah,
this is
absolutely.
actually Carrie Elway's book that he wrote about it and his
Cool.
perspective and travel through the whole thing. And it's so cool to learn about, him and Andre the Giant behind the scenes and just some of the wacky ideas and things that got thrown around but
I
taken
love
out of
it.
the script. So very cool stuff like that. And then an audiobook actually I've been getting into, we're trying to get more into audio,
Hmm.
was actually a Critical Role book, which for the internet out there that does know Critical Role, that is a YouTube based D&D kind of deal. So they have a book about one of the characters' backstories kind of deal because, again, that is like the professional level of D&D. So
Okay.
I will say Critical Role is like here as far as like professional can be professional. It
Hmm.
is the top of the list because a lot of those guys are voice actors. So it's a
Ah,
very,
cool.
very interesting show in that regard. But they build these worlds, they build these environments, they build these characters so in depth and so intriguing that they're like books themselves as they're playing. So then later they kind of release some biographies and stuff about them. And I've just been kind of listening through some of those. I think Molly Mock is the one that I'm on right now.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's very fun to kind of hear the own person that was the character kind of narrating their tale.
Yeah,
It's kind of interesting.
that's cool. Very cool. Well, this is a great segue into what's something people often get wrong about you. I feel like we just learned all kinds of things.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably everything that I just listed. Uh,
Yeah, right.
so it's kind of funny.
They're
A
like
lot
this
of,
insurance guy,
yeah,
podcast insurance guy. I had no idea. Hawaiian shirts and summer
yeah.
shandies. Yeah.
It's kind of funny because in person I'm like 6'2". I'm not super broad, but I'm built like a basketball player. I'll put it that way.
Hmm.
I am always like up for any athletics, whatever have you. I think the commonality that I get is I get overlooked because they know, oh, hey, he's a broadcast guy,
Uh
or oh,
huh.
he's an insurance agent. He's not
Yeah.
that athletic.
Yeah. Huh.
I may or may not have hustled a game or two in my day.
Okay. So noted. If you're picking for teams, be sure to get Dylan on your team. I love
Yeah,
it.
you probably want me on your basketball team. I'll say that.
Okay. Noted. This is good. This is good stuff. When we have a networking basketball league, this will be important
Oh,
information for sure.
that's what we need right now is
Yeah.
everybody just form up teams. We'll just do it college style to where it's like a day long thing.
I love it. So I like to wrap up with when you think about what we can all do to make the world a better place, what comes to mind for you?
Oh man, I'm gonna sound like a cheese ball here.
Okay, perfect.
In my radio life, I would end every day at 5 p.m. Or actually, it was at 6 p.m. because we'd have to drive at 5. I would end every day with my quote of the day.
Mm,
My quote of the day was always to try to get people to think. Try to get people to think about something or spark something in somebody. And
sure.
a lot of the core message that I would read is just be kind. Smile for
Mm,
somebody. Might be the only smile they saw all day, all week.
mm,
I am just that, I'll say I'm just a bleeding heart for people feeling sad when there's so much good that everybody else could help them not feel that way. Now, again, that's a very broad answer for what I like and to try to represent, but it's always the golden rule, right? Be nice to people, they'll be nice back. But again, I'm a big proponent of, hey, just smile. It could be a lot worse. It could be the worst day of somebody's life, and that smile you just did might have prevented something bad. You never know.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. This is fun. And I feel like we're all over the place, which is great. We went from networking podcasts to how to do quotes, a little insurance thoughts in there, sprinkled in there as well. And we got to learn all about your Hawaiian t-shirt collection, which is awesome.
Yeah. I'll have to probably send a picture for your editor to put up on the screen of all my Hawaiians in a row there. I have limited some down. I've gotten rid of a couple.
That's fun.
My girlfriend might argue not enough.
Right, not enough. Yeah, she probably has a pile. And these ones can go too.
She might have a couple that she's like, nah, that one's okay. But I won her over because I have a Baby Yoda one. So I won her over on that one.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Well, thank you so much. This is huge. And I'm just going to encourage everyone again to check out the podcast, a link, of course, in the show notes. And we'll link to the conversation that we had.
Yeah.
And there's a number of other, I think, great episodes that you mentioned throughout that will be awesome to check out. So just a reminder for everyone to go check out the podcast, and a plug too, if you are in the Omaha or surrounding area with a business, I'm going to extend the invitation for you to reach out to Dylan. He can always have a conversation and just see where that might lead. And perhaps it would be fun to be a guest on Dylan's podcast, which would be awesome.
Absolutely. Whether that's reaching out to you to get more information or reaching out to me directly, always happy to have more businesses on the show. That's what it's all about. Happy to look at your business. And I'm so happy to be on this show. So thank you so much, Vivian.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Hey, what a great episode with Dylan. Doesn't he have just some awesome insights about doing networking in a really different way? I love that we got to talk about how you can use a podcast as an opportunity for real intentional networking for your business, for your organization, and creating content in an intentional way while not always making it like about you and your sales pitch. And that's one of the things we're really passionate about here at Tandem Works as well, is helping you figure out ways that you can connect genuinely with the audiences that you need and want to connect with so that you can bring your unique magic to the world. And a podcast can be a great way to do that, just like Dylan laid out, a networking podcast. So I hope you go check it out. It's a great example of what that looks like. And if that's something you're thinking that you might want to get started yourself, that's actually one of the great topics that we can cover in a one-to-one session that we do here at Tandem Works. We now offer opportunities to do a one-to-one mentoring, coaching, and plan creation session. They are 90 minutes long, and we can cover all kinds of different topics, including how can I launch a podcast? What would I do? What would the topics be? How do I find guests? How do I get that started? Who are the connections I need as far as recording and editing? We did that recently as a one-to-one session with a husband and wife team who own a business and we're looking at getting a podcast started. And so they booked one of those sessions with us. So it's a great example of a way that you can use those one-to-ones. They are new here at Tandem Works, and we're really excited about them and being able to offer access to all kinds of different business owners just like you to be able to have a meaningful conversation. So they're a 90-minute session. You can book them in the link in our show notes below. They're a flat $300, just very bite-sized. We can do one session. We can string a whole series together. But it's just another way that we are looking to connect with business owners like you and business leaders and nonprofit leaders who just are looking for a way to get unstuck, and you just need a phone a friend. And so it's an awesome way that we can serve our community. Love to connect with you in that way. And until next time, just have a great week, and we'll see you in the next episode.